Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. Settle back in your seats because we have a great interview today with a great founder, a great entrepreneur. When we talk about fintech, we talk about it all the time on DotCom Magazine. There are certain people in this space that are really changing the conversation about fintech and the way in which money is being used and the way in which money is being distributed to workforces. And of course, one of those leaders, worldwide leaders in the space, his name is Mr. Jason Lee. He, of course, is the founder and CEO of Salt Labs. Now, Jason also is the founder of DailyPay, but we wanted to bring him in today to talk about Salt Labs, what they're doing. I mean, when you think about fintech, and you think about what's going on in the world today, things are changing at a very fast pace. And Jason certainly is one of those leaders that is changing the conversation about the way in which money changes hands from employer to employee and the way in which things happen. So we're delighted to have Jason on the show today. Jason, welcome to the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Well, Andy, it's great to be back. I got to tell you, when you were going through that incredible introduction, I was going to say, and here's Andy Jacob. I mean, the entrepreneur, the amazing leader in the technology space. But it's notwithstanding, I maybe that exaggerated introduction. It is great to be back with you, Andy. I was thinking about the last time you and I spoke. It's when I was at DailyPay and operating as CEO there, and it was during the pandemic. And I got to tell you, it was a welcome break from all of the things that we were doing in the pandemic, the shutdown, and we got to spend a few minutes together on that interview. So I guess I didn't screw it up too badly. So thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course. We're glad to have you back. We're going to focus in on Salt Labs. Of course, what happened at DailyPay is just remarkable. But let's go. Let's talk about Salt Labs. We always pull it back to 30,000 feet. So tell us about Salt Labs, how it's changing the dynamic. And then we have so many questions for you, Jason.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. So I guess I'm back. I don't know why I've decided to start another company. I exited my last one, and I guess there was really no more books to read and no more articles to scroll on my phone. So, anyways, I'm back with a new company called Salt Labs. Maybe I'll just start with this because, gosh, so many people ask me, what do you mean Salt Labs? What are you studying? Why salt? The Latin word for the word salary is a word called salarium. And if you actually were to spell that out, it starts with the three letters of S-A-L, sol. And that is the root word for salt. And the reason why that is because the early salaries for the Roman army and the like were actually paid in salt. There's a very simple reason for that, Andy. It's, think about a time where, let's say your job was to go feed the village and you had to go out and, hunt the buffalo or, do something. Thank goodness jobs have changed. But, you'd go out and hunt the buffalo or kill the animal. And the reality is that was your job. You kind of had to deal with the effect of that job that day. But what I mean by that is, well, if you killed the buffalo, the reality is you probably had to eat the buffalo that day. We didn't have things like refrigeration and freezing and beef jerky and all the things that we have today. You killed the buffalo. That was your job. And then you have to eat the buffalo that day. And all of a sudden, a bunch of years ago, someone figured out that, hey, if you put a little salt on the buffalo, you could actually preserve it. In effect, the work that you do today, the value of that work can be enjoyed not just today, but it can be enjoyed tomorrow. It can be enjoyed next week, next month, next year. And in effect, salt creates this preserving effect that results in a longitudinal relationship with your work. It extends the value across time. And that is what we are trying to do here at Salt Labs. The mission of Salt Labs is to enable hourly workers, frontline workers. Remember those folks, the people who we know were so important during the pandemic? We want to figure out a way to enable them to actually capture the value that they are creating over time, as opposed to simply, hey, I worked today, I got a paycheck. By the way, hopefully you're getting that money as you work, because that's my other company. But in effect, like, hey, like you get now to do something. Rather, you get value for something that you did maybe a month from now, 3 months from now, a year from now. And so in effect, you're still able to enjoy the benefits of killing and eating that buffalo over time. And that's really the purpose of Salt Labs.
Wow, I love it. And of course, Salt's been in stealth mode. Now we're talking about it. So let's unpack it, because people are listening to this, and that's a great attribute to think about, the way in which salt can extend the life of, let's say, meat with your example. But now people work, they get paid. How do we extend out their work opportunity? How do we extend out what they did into the future? So let's explain it a little bit more, because it's great.
So maybe I'll start with how it works for broadly defined, what we call, I guess, professional or white collar work. If you think about wealth creation in this country, it's predominantly based on asset accumulation. That's a very fancy way of saying, my goodness, the stuff that you get to pass down to your children, and your children get to pass that down to their children, it generally tends to be very asset based. I got a bunch of stocks. Maybe I was lucky enough to have a house. And if you really think about how generational wealth is created, it's done through asset accumulation. Well, no one's fault, of course, and I'm not, Andy, a particularly political guy, but when you look at history in the United States, there have been a number of policy decisions that were made over the course of a long period of time that actually made asset accumulation very difficult for certain populations in the country. I'll give you one example. You take the Homestead Act. That was after the Civil War, and people decided, hey, we ought to divide up the country. You get this land. It was really Oprah. You get this land. You get this land. You get this land. But the horrible thing was, there were certain populations at the time who were deprived of that ability to get land, namely liberated slaves. And so that simple decision to divide up the country and give a bunch of people, a bunch of land, it actually created this kind of generational effect where now all of a sudden there was nothing to pass down. If you look at different things that amplified that decision, take something like redlining, or even the GI Bill, something that was supposed to be a good thing, which is, hey, a bunch of people came back from World War I, World War II, let's help them buy a house. Well, the reality was the Army was predominantly one particular group of folks, and others were not even allowed to participate in the military at that time. And so because of that, we just have sort of these weird consequences over time that have really made asset accumulation very difficult for certain populations. That's kind of all around here. And so what the heck does that mean in terms of what we're trying to do today? White collar or professional work generally has the benefit of things like maybe stock options or stock ownership or partnership interests. For that matter, even 401k is a form of long-dated ownership. I work today, I get to put some money into this cool account, I stay at that company for several years, and gosh, all of a sudden those benefits are accruing and compounding, and I have a bunch of retirement savings. And that tends to be stuff that tends to be a lot more prevalent in professional contexts. Well, for the hourly workforce, those things don't exist. It's not like you can go to McDonald's and they'll say, here's your stock program, or you walk in to be a cashier at a restaurant and they say, well, why don't you just own a piece of our restaurant? Now, there are episodic instances of that, but it's not sort of widespread enough. And so really we sat around a table and said, we want to solve this generational wealth gap. We want to solve generational wealth inequality. And to do that, we have to start with asset accumulation. Well, what does that mean in English? It's, and this probably gets into the how of how we're trying to get this done. Well, to solve that problem, which has been built and really sort of metastasized over hundreds of years. Well, it's going to take us a little bit of time to solve that, even using great technology. But as you say, Andy, behind you, nothing is impossible. We actually believe we can actually make this happen. The way we're going to start is very simple. We are starting with a very simple form of asset ownership or asset earning, and that is in the form of points. You heard me right, points. Now, let me maybe take a quick break and from that and describe. You probably have a lot of assets that you don't even know are assets. If you travel a lot, you might have a frequent flyer mile program. You got some points. Maybe you have some stars because you like to drink Starbucks, and so you've got some stars on your Starbucks app. If you're a Starbucks drinker, maybe you've got a punch card at the local deli, whatever it might be. But when I looked across, hey, how is it that we can start very simply building asset ownership for frontline workers? Well, I kind of thought about points. And gosh, in my opinion, consumers today have gone way beyond the expectation of providing money for goods and services. The reality is when we provide money for goods and services, we also expect something in return. I buy a plane ticket, I expect to get miles. I buy a cup of coffee, I expect to get stars. And from my standpoint, I think when workers work, they ought to be getting something in return. They ought to be getting back salt, our version of points. Work 1 hour, get 1 salt. And if I were to stop right here, that's a pretty cool idea. You get reward points. You get to redeem for goods and experiences. That's cool. And that's pretty interesting. But what does this have to do with all the things I just talked about? Our vision is that over time, we would like to add features and properties to salt to make it less points-like and more asset-like. And that over time, if we are successful, you might be able to buy a house with salt. You may be able to convert salt into cash for savings. You may be able to put a down payment on a car. These are the things that we dream about that seem impossible today. But then again, when I started my first company, people said to me and laughed and said, nobody needs their money when they want. And that's really hard to do for the following 85 reasons. And now there are 100 companies around the world who have brought on-demand pay globally. This is a global phenomenon. I work with a bunch of them, and that market is now developed. So we're trying to do something also pretty gravity-defying with salt.
Yeah, I love it. So Salt Labs really is enabling the frontline worker, like you call them the frontline worker, to really own the long-term value of their work. And another thing that happens here with I'm going to call the total reward structure for the frontline workers is that companies really can better align their long-term interests with their workers. I mean, it seems like it's just a wonderful sort of symbiotic program you're putting together. How does that alignment happen between the long-term interests of their workers and the companies that are employing the workers, Jason?
Well, look, I have a general thesis that employees are like consumers. Now, why do we think that? Well, you as a consumer, let's say you wanted to get a cup of coffee and you're driving down the freeway and you see a Starbucks, you see a Dunkin' Donuts, and you see a Tim Hortons. 3 different options. Well, if it were me, I'd actually pull into the Starbucks. Now, do I actually love Starbucks coffee? Candidly, I mean, I like it, but it's not, it's not the end all be all of coffee. But I go there because I'm a loyal customer. I have a Starbucks rewards point card. They give me cool things. I get cool emails. I get a free coffee on my birthday. I get all these things that I'm a loyal customer. And even though Starbucks has probably hundreds of millions of customers around the world, I consider myself to be one of them. And so I'm a Starbucks guy. That's where I go. When I'm at the airport, and how many of us have been stuck or had the experience of being stuck at O'Hare Airport during a big snowstorm, and the flight is 4 hours delayed, and you're mad, you're upset, you're tired. But I, for one, probably would say, well, at least I'm getting my miles. You see, there's something about loyalty and there's something about this experience which makes tough things not as tough, and it makes decisioning easier. And so when we think about how does the employer treat the employee, not like some potential liability, but rather truly as someone that they need to engage with. And not that someone they just need to retain or, recruit, but rather someone where you could actually build a loyalty connection with. Well, that's radical. Think about really deepening the bond so that what you're actually creating with that employee is a loyal following. Well, I believe we should look to people who have done this before. And those are brands and merchants and folks like that who have actually said, hey, look, there's a way to go create a loyal United Miles or United customer or Starbucks drinker. It's to actually engage them in a two-way relationship. And that's really what we'd like to do at Salt. Our view is in the labor market that we are in, and certainly post-pandemic, where these jobs have become very, very difficult to fill. Well, guess what? Employers need to rethink how they are engaging with their workforce to make this less about you do this for me and I will give you this, but rather, how do we partner together to create more of a loyalty-based relationship? And that's really what we're up to here at Salt.
I love it, Jason. I hear you talk and I'm thinking to myself, it's a way possibly for these workers to build some generational wealth. And I think about it because you mentioned the home. So in the rewards program, Jason, will the salts be able, I'll call them salts for now, will they be able to be transferred to their family and friends, and then maybe even some type of vesting in the future that, maybe a frontline worker can earn additional points or rewards for being on the job for a period of time? How does all that work?
Well, let me ask you, Andy, have you ever tried to share or transfer your airline miles or a Starbucks point? No, they're non-transferable. Actually, what's incredible is they actually expire.
Right.
So I don't know if you knew this, but it's so hard to use them. And there's a very, very simple reason for it. They ain't yours to begin with. You see, that's why they can expire, because they ain't yours. Meaning Starbucks says, and this is not a knock on Starbucks, every program is structured this way. They say, hey, look, you have this thing, you earn this star, but you got to redeem it in the next 89 days, or it's use it or lose it. And so when I think about what are the attributes and properties of a real asset ownership, well, it starts with, guess what? They're mine. They never expire. Like, I got this thing, I earned it, and it ain't going to expire. What does that mean? Like, this is actually mine. I can use it until I die. Speaking of death, gosh, not to be so grim, but I don't know if you knew this, but you can't bequeath your miles. Do you ever wonder that? What happens if I pass? And what happens to my miles? And what's hilarious about it is the airline will tell you, well, could you just log in as the deceased? Like they will actually tell you, just log in as the deceased. And so these are funny, but yet true evidentiary points that these things were never yours to begin with. And one of the things that I believed deeply in at DailyPay, my first company, was the money that you earn is yours. Like, we are giving you that money now. It's not a loan. You don't have to pay it back. No. You earn this throughout the pay period. That's why we can give it to you. It's like no different than if the money were sitting in your checking account. And so by the same token, the salt that you earn is yours. That's why it never expires. That's why you can actually transfer it. In our version 1 of our application, we've got a peer-to-peer function. What that means in English is it looks like Venmo. It looks like PayPal. I can literally right now, Andy, send you some salt. And now you've got some salt. Now you're a salt holder and a salt man. Based on, although Andy, I'm sure, I mean, knowing what I know of you, you probably don't need any. But but I could zap you some salt right now because, and the reason why you can do that fundamentally is because guess what? It's yours. If something is yours, you ought to be able to give it to whomever you want. And so that's actually one of the core North Stars of our company is this is yours. And asset ownership starts with identifying who is the actual owner. And that's why we, as I mentioned before, we are hard at work building features and properties which make salt more of your own. And those are the first two ones that we've started with.
I love it. Of course, we've only cut out a certain amount of time. We're going to bring you back on the show, but now more than ever is really an ideal time to really look at employee loyalty and better align the enterprise's long-term interests with those of their workers. And you're doing it with salt. I love it so much. Yeah, you can zap me some salt. I'd love to get some salt, Jason. And I want to thank you so much for coming on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series again to give us a high level of what's happening. But wow, what a great concept. We're going to watch salt, of course, and have people zap their salt all over the world potentially and build long-term wealth and put themselves in the position to really own something into the future of what they're producing today. So I love the idea, Jason, and thanks so much for coming on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series again today.
Andy, I hope this is my last time here, because if I'm here again, that means I've started a third company. And let me just tell you, I don't think I can do it.